Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Now, usually on this show we build fun and inexpensive focused Commander decks on a $25 budget, but today we have an episode of Quest for Quarters. On episodes like these, I'm going to take you through underrated budget cards that you should be considering when you build your decks. For these episodes, not only does every card have to be under $1, but they also need to be used less than 4% of eligible decks on EDH Rec. In this show, and episodes like this are possible because of viewers like you. So make sure that you like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and share it with friends. And while you're at it, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any episodes. You can also support this show directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without their support. Another way that you can support the show is by checking out our merchandise on thecommandersquarters.com. And finally, you can support this show by supporting our sponsor, TCG Player. So whenever you're buying a deck or just individual cards, make sure you use our links below. Today's first underrated Quest for Quarters card is Hot Soup. Currently it's only 17 cents and is seeing play in just 468 decks. It's an equipment that costs 1 and it costs 3 to equip. It says equipped creature can't be blocked. Whenever equipped creature is dealt damage, destroy it. There are very few ways out there to make a creature permanently unblockable. Now, of course, there is a downside to this card, but that downside is very much mitigated in Commander. There are very few decks out there that are actually running burn spells or ping effects. And any burn spells that they might be running, like Blasphemous Act, would kill it anyway. So as long as you don't actually block with the creature that Hot Soup is equipped to, that part doesn't really matter. And there are plenty of creatures out there that you would love to guarantee to get through. This guarantee makes Hot Soup very good in Voltron-style strategies. It's especially good with commanders that can actually protect themselves like Nezahal. The only other piece of equipment that can actually guarantee unblockability is Whispersoul Cloak. Currently it's just over $1 and is seeing play in 16,000 decks. Now, on top of making the creature it's equipping unblockable, it also gives it Shroud. So while it does protect your creature from your opponent's spells, it also protects them from yours too. This can be a very hindering effect in a Voltron-style strategy. I'm not going to claim that Hot Soup is better, but there are definitely situations for both. And there are plenty of decks out there where Whispersoul Cloak is just used as protection and not for the unblockability. But then there's Trailblazer's Boots, which is definitely used to get creatures through. Currently it's at $1.22 and is seeing play in 2,900 decks. It does cost 1 more than Hot Soup, but its equip cost is 1 less. And it says equip creature has non-basic land walk. You definitely aren't guaranteed that your opponents are going to have a non-basic land. But in Commander, the chances are pretty high that this is going to get your creature through. The only decks that this might not work against are some monocolored decks. In contrast, you can always depend on Hot Soup, but it is riskier. Regardless, even though there's a downside to both cards, both work very well in a Voltron-style deck. There should be a gap between the two, but it shouldn't be anywhere near this large. Another very comparable card to this is Prowler's Helm. Currently it's just 27 cents and is seeing play in 2,000 decks. It says equipped creature can't be blocked except by walls. So much like Trailblazer's Boots, the vast majority of the time the creature's going to be unblockable. And much like Hot Soup, I think Prowler's Helm is even underplayed. Not every single deck needs to make creatures unblockable, but there's definitely a need for it. So the final card I'm going to bring up is Rogue's Passage. It's seeing play in over 35,000 decks, which is 16% of all decks. Now this is a utility land, so it's a nice easy include in a lot of decks. I'm just trying to illustrate the point that there are plenty of decks out there that want to make creatures unblockable. Hot Soup is a simple and efficient way to do this, and yes, there is a downside to it. But in the right deck, this card can be absolutely amazing. My next underrated Quest for Quarters card is Final Parting. Currently it's just 25 cents and is seeing play in 2,400 decks. It's a sorcery that costs 3 black and it says search your library for 2 cards, put 1 into your hand and the other into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. Tutor effects are huge in Commander and can be very impactful. And this one essentially goes and gets you any 2 cards that you want. Now one of those cards does go into your graveyard, but there are plenty of ways in black to either get that back or to take advantage of it actually being in your graveyard. Black even has creatures that you can actually just cast out of your graveyard. 5 mana is a decent amount, but if you actually get to tutor for 2 cards, it's well worth it. Final Parting is essentially a Diabolic Tutor stapled onto an Entomb, and both of these cards are seeing a lot more play than Final Parting. Diabolic Tutor's in 25,000 decks and Entomb is in 8,500. And Entomb would probably see even more play if it was a little more budget. I'm not going to say that Final Parting is better than either of these cards. What I will say is that Diabolic Tutor only gets you 1 card and it costs 4 mana. In the right deck, Final Parting essentially gets you 2 cards for 5 mana. It's definitely more of a niche card, but that gap should be nowhere near as large. Even if you only have a few cards that you benefit from having in the graveyard, you should be considering it. I know for sure that there are definitely decks out there that want this kind of effect. I know this because Gerard's Orders is a very similar card. Currently it's seeing play in 4,400 decks, which is 9% of its eligible decks. It essentially does the exact same thing, but just for creatures. Now it does only cost 4 mana instead of 5, but still Final Parting can get you any cards. I think that 1 extra mana is well worth that effect. And in my opinion, any deck that runs Gerard's Orders should probably be running Final Parting. And since more decks have access to Final Parting than Gerard's Orders, it should probably be seeing more play in total. That 7% gap between the two of them seems very high to me. Even a card like Corpse Connoisseur is seeing more play than Final Parting. Now it's not much of a difference, but I just think Final Parting can be much more impactful on a deck. Essentially, Corpse Connoisseur can get you 2 creatures into your graveyard for a total of 9 mana. Now because the effect is on a creature, this can be abused much more easily. In comparison, Final Parting gets you any 2 cards for just 5 mana and one of those even goes into your hand. I think that people overlook this card because they think that it has to go in graveyard-centric decks. But the truth is you can easily add this to your deck even if you just have a couple of cards with flashback. And now let's move on to my next Quest for Quarters card with Elvish Rejuvenator. Currently it's just 13 cents and is seeing play in 1,300 decks. It's a 1/1 elf druid that costs 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and then you put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This is a fantastic way to ramp on a body that can even get you non-basic lands. If you have multiple lands in your top 5, you can even pick the best one. Now there is a slight downside to this card since you can actually whiff. I'm no mathematician, but if you're running the right amount of lands for your deck, I think that percentage is pretty low. So we do have to keep in mind that small percentage chance of a downside, but that upside can be huge. But now let's compare this to another creature-based ramp effect with Wood Elves. Wood Elves has the exact same stats, and it lets you search your library for a forest card and put it onto the battlefield untapped. So there are definitely some ways that this can be better and ways that it can be worse. First off, that land comes into play untapped so you can use it right away. And it also can get you any of the forest dual lands. So that's pretty much guaranteed fixing if you have those in your deck. If you're playing more within a budget and don't have those cards, Wood Elves can be strictly worse. It will get you a basic forest, but that doesn't help you fix your mana. Another comparable card is Farhaven Elf, which is seeing play in 9,200 decks. It's going to go and get you any basic land and put into play tapped. So this is a guaranteed way to both ramp and fix your mana. At $1.51 though, Farhaven Elf is pretty much just out of budget. Elvish Rejuvenator might not be a guarantee, but it has a higher upside and it's much cheaper. I'm not going to say that it should show up in more decks than either Farhaven or Wood Elves, but I will say that its downside is being overblown. The calculated risk that you take is definitely worth it for its upside. This is especially true in a deck that's more than 2 colors. Having a chance to grab a land that can tap for 2 colors that you're missing is huge, and ramping is always going to be more effective than just getting a land into your hand. A card that does just that at the same cost is Civic Wayfinder. Now it is a 2/2, but you're not playing these creatures for their power and toughness. Its enter the battlefield trigger is much worse since it doesn't actually ramp you, and yet the amount that it's seeing play isn't that far off from Rejuvenator. Yes, there are decks out there that care about getting lands into your hand, but I would argue that there are far more decks that care about getting lands into play and ramping effectively. But let's just look at one last card for comparison's sake. Undude Giant's a pretty underwhelming card, and that's why it's only seeing play in 542 decks. It's a Farhaven Elf that costs 1 more, and green has no need for that. 4 mana to ramp by 1 land just isn't worth it for green. Yes, it's a 2/4, but again, its power and toughness don't matter, it's its enter the battlefield effect that we care about. And yet it's somehow seeing play in nearly half as many decks as our card. Both even have the same percentage at 1%. There's no way that these two numbers should be anywhere near each other. Elvish Rejuvenator deserves a lot more respect than it's getting. Just test it out for yourself and see how many times you actually hit that land and how many times you miss. I think you'll be surprised to see that the vast majority of the time you're going to hit that land. And the amount of impact that it can have by grabbing you one of your best lands is huge. The final Quest for Quarters card we're going to go through today is Unwind. Currently it's just 13 cents and is seeing play in 2,700 decks. It's an instant that costs 2 and a blue, and it says counter target non-creature spell, untap up to 3 lands. This is a fantastic counterspell that essentially gives you your mana back. And in some situations this can even gain you mana. With something like Cage Sun in play, you essentially gain 3 mana by casting the spell. Let's look at probably the most comparable card to this with Rewind. Currently it's seeing play in over 3 times as many decks as Unwind. It costs 2 blue and it says counter target spell, untap up to 4 lands. So it does cost 1 more, but it also untaps 1 extra land. And unlike Unwind, it can also counter creature spells too. Since these spells untap your lands, essentially at the end of the day, both of them are free. The only actual cost to you is keeping up the mana for them. And having to keep up 4 mana can be a lot more than having to keep up 3. And most of the time in Commander, you're looking to counter non-creature spells rather than creature spells, which is why a card like Negate is seeing play in 19,000 decks. Again, the cheaper your counter spells are, the less you have to hold up for them, which is why Negate is seeing so much play since it only costs 2 mana. Unwind might give you your mana back, but again, it does cost 1 more. Regardless, it's still a great card and should be seeing more play than it is. In my opinion, it shouldn't be seeing as much play as Negate, but it should be seeing more than Rewind. Again, people are much more concerned with countering non-creature spells than creature spells, because once a creature hits the board, you can deal with it in other ways. And that's the reason why Essence Scatter sees a lot less play than Negate. Basically, they're the exact same card, but one cares about creature spells and one cares about non-creature spells. And the one that cares about creature spells only sees play in 2% of decks. And finally, the most upsetting card that I can compare this to is Cancel. Cancel is somehow seeing play in nearly twice as many decks as Unwind. There are plenty of better versions of this card, but it still somehow sees play in 5% of decks. The fact that it's seeing more play than Unwind is absolutely absurd. So 2 things to take away from this. First off, Unwind is a fantastic card and it should be seeing more play than it is. It counters the more important types of spells and it gets you your mana back. And secondly, if you're playing Cancel, please consider taking it out of your decks. There are plenty of better options that have the exact same effect that have some additional utility. Unless you're running a deck that runs pretty much every single counterspell, there's got to be something better out there. So just to recap, Unwind good, Cancel bad. But I really want to hear your thoughts on this take, so why don't you let me know in the comments below. And make sure that you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future Commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. And while you're at it, check out some of our other episodes on budget deck techs, Quest for Quarters episodes, Commander topics, and Creators Quarters. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.